Happy Mario Day, everyone! Unless you're watching this on literally any other day, and then... Happy Tuesday, maybe? Someone watching this on a random Tuesday in the future is gonna be super freaked out that I guessed it right. Jeez, 10 seconds into this video and I've already lost the narrative thread. Sorry. We're here today to celebrate the Mario series. It's one of my favorite properties of all time, and a big reason why I will always be a Nintendo fanboy, even if Mario games arguably don't have the same luster they had when I was a kid. Instead of just gushing over my love of the series as a whole, though, I thought I'd dive into the history of the series and how great the worlds are to explore in each game. I actually had a much more ambitious scope for this list, but I forgot about it and then decided to make this video on March 9th, to put it out on March 10th, so we're just gonna do it this way and hope for the best, okay? Before we get into the list, as usual, I want to lay down a few ground rules. This list won't include every Mario game, but it is broken down by game, so there's only one numbered entry per game. Otherwise, it would probably just be at least half Mario Galaxy worlds, because I friggin' love those games. I will briefly touch on a runner-up world for each game I cover, though, because some of these decisions were hard, and I wanted an excuse to gush over a few extras. The other rule is that this only includes games that have themed worlds. For example, there will be no spin-off games like Mario Kart, and no games that just throw unrelated levels in order, such as the new Super Mario Bros. Games. And as always, this list is just my opinion, so don't call me stupid for not including your favorites. I'm not a psychic. Anyway, number 7. Let's do this. As I mentioned earlier, I could easily make this whole list just various galaxies from this game and its prequel, but for this game specifically, I struggled a bit to decide my favorite because it's a lot of smaller galaxies in the first game, and since I love a lot of the same types of galaxies, I had to decide which specific one to choose. I picked this one because it has some clever takes on the snow world trope in Mario games. For one, it's just a fun little sandbox to explore. Less about jumping between small planets like a lot of the galaxies, and more about finding secrets around larger fields and using the power-ups in fun ways. And unlike a lot of ice worlds that just focus on firepower, Freezy Flake actually puts just as much emphasis on the new rock power-up to roll around Goron style, wrecking whatever you want. And that just... rocks. Yeah, I went there. It does still have the opportunity to melt the snowy landscape with firepower, because it is an ice world after all, but it mixes things up enough to stand out from other ice worlds, even if the boss is pretty lame and formulaic. Mario Galaxy games are at their best when it comes to new power-ups though, which leads to this game's runner-up. This world is such an interesting take on the traditional grassy template Mario games are known for, because it makes clever use of windmills and the new Cloud Mario power-up in a way that sadly just doesn't happen enough in this game. It's probably one of my all-time favorite Mario power-ups, but that's a list for another video. The fact that this world is almost entirely reliant on this power-up is a big part of why it stands out to me. Some of the worlds in this game have a larger variety of mechanics throughout the world, but don't delve that deep into any specific one, so I frankly prefer the ones that just go hard with their gimmick, and you basically keep the power-up for the entire duration. You could argue that Cloud Mario doesn't have enough depth to deserve a whole world catered to it, but you'd be wrong because it's adorable and I love it. But seriously, the simple act of making platforms at will, combined with wind tunnels and clever platforming, makes this power-up simple but effective without losing what makes Mario great. It enhances the abilities he already has, instead of taking over his ability to do anything else. And that makes for a super fun Mario platforming experience, whereas a lot of the other worlds just have moments of greatness in worlds that are otherwise just okay overall. Who else remembers that first trailer for Mario Odyssey that showed this crazy Donkey Kong themed cityscape and had Mario interacting with unsettlingly realistic looking humanoids? I don't understand the implications that means for Mario's stumpy proportions either, by the way. Anyway, from that first moment, we knew that Mario Odyssey was going to be unlike any other Mario game that came before it. I'd argue that ultimately it didn't end up being true, as it eschews disappointingly close to the gameplay mechanics of Mario 64 that came out 20 years before it, but this kingdom still stands tall above the rest as a concrete jungle gym for Mario to explore. To all the street names and electronic billboards bringing it to life, to the variety of hidden locations around the kingdom to explore, to one of the most amazing moments in the entire game being housed here. This is a world that's truly unique and magical and unlike anything we've seen in a Mario game before. Unfortunately, there's not as much inspiration in the actual moons you find in the kingdom, as it tends to be the same generic hiding spots and fetch quests that every other kingdom has, but there are some really clever Cappy transformations here that mix up the tasks you're supposed to do, including possessing these people? These things just can't be normal humans, because Mario can't possess anyone else in the game, only objects and creatures, so why can these guys be taken over? It's unsettling, but I also kind of love it. It almost makes me want to put this world higher, but y'all, there's so many good worlds in this series. Something had to give. Let's briefly touch on another world in this game though, which is creative in other ways. This one seems like a pretty obvious choice, but it didn't officially make the list because it's a little too reliant on player nostalgia. It's great for me, because I grew up with Mario 64 and ran around in an "aw man, remember this" way, but the kingdom itself is a pretty generic open plain that just keeps reiterating the "how come the moons here look so different" joke. Yeah, it's cool to go into the affectionately recreated castle and putting on the 64-bit costume, but the rest of the kingdom is a post-game symptom of same old syndrome, where you have one more chance to do the best of moments from other kingdoms, such as yet another Koopa race and boss rematches scattered around the kingdom. But hey, the best Mario worlds are known more for memorable visuals and fun exploration than specific gameplay moments, and this one has that in spades. Speaking of Mario 64 though, it's impossible to do a list of the best worlds without including the classic game that I'm sure other YouTubers would have focused the entire list on. I personally don't think the early worlds in this game are the best though. They're just the most memorable because literally everyone knows about them, so I wanted to dive a little deeper into the game's more clever worlds. Tick-Tock Clock gets a special shout out because it uses the portrait and exploration mechanics of the game in really clever ways. For example, if you watch the clock before entering this area, the level will change speed depending on where the clock hands are when you enter the portrait. This is something that the average person might not even notice the first time they enter, but it can drastically change the difficulty level of the platforming, or even your ability to complete certain objectives, since you need it to be a certain speed in order to do the thing. The world itself is also just really cleverly laid out, as you basically explore up the gears inside a clock, which makes for some really fun platforming sections, and creates brilliant objectives needed to be completed in this world all based around time manipulation, which I am always a sucker for. And I know I mentioned I wouldn't be including any spin-offs, but this world holds a special place in my heart because the Tick-Tock Clock track in Mario Kart is also one of my favorite tracks of all time. And it's a clear homage to this game's world, and probably wouldn't have even existed otherwise. This game's runner-up world similarly does clever things with the game's portrait system, but it's just a little less successful in its execution. This isn't the first time a Mario game has played around with scale, or even the best example of it, but there was a certain novelty to it in the first 3D Mario game when I was a kid. This world basically has 3 paintings you can enter. One tiny, one normal, and one large. Different objectives require jumping between the different sizes by going into pipes around the world, but the world itself is actually fairly small, and for the most part the objectives don't really make good use of the size-changing mechanic. And it's just not very fun to explore when Mario is large because the platforms are so small and the enemies aren't really even a threat. It can also be hard to know which painting to jump into for the next objective, which can lead to aimless exploring at each size until you know what to do. But I still appreciate what this world tried to do in order to mix up the types of worlds in this game, as opposed to just another thematic sandbox like Bob-omb Battlefield and Thwomp's Fortress, even if its execution didn't quite work. Alright, it's time to jump into a different type of Mario game with worlds that are no less amazing. You might argue that Mario RPG is a spin-off that shouldn't be included, But this game's areas are specifically called worlds and share thematic landscapes that all tie together, so why shouldn't I include it? It's one of the best Mario games ever made, after all. Anyway, when I play this game, I'm most hooked to the early parts of the game where Mario is collecting partners and figuring out what's happening. Moleville itself has some great exploration elements inside the mountain, a really unique Mode 7 minigame that breaks up the gameplay, and a lot of fun character moments. But the reason this world is so high is because of Booster's Tower and everything surrounding Booster as a character. That whole section is one of my favorite gaming moments of all time, with fun platforming, some goofy Easter eggs, great new equipment to grab, and some interesting puzzles. It's also where you get the second best party member of the game. Sorry Bowser, Gino's cooler. All of this culminates in a fantastic wedding sequence in Marymore and a boss fight against a literal cake. Man, I love this game. Why am I even talking about all these other games? The point is that most of the best moments in this game are in this world, so of course it deserves a spot. This world is followed up by some nearly as good moments though, so let's get to the runner-up. There are some frustrating elements of this world, so I was actually torn between it and Nimbus, but ultimately the gameplay variety and visuals in this part won out. Plus, I friggin' hate the volcano and the Power Rangers knockoffs. Anyway, this area starts with Star Hill, which has some great lore moments tying into the wishes of various characters you've met in the game, but it really kicks into gear with Seaside Town and the Sunken Ship. The underwater ship area is actually my favorite part to play, after Booster's Tower, because of all the awesome gameplay gimmicks here and the super unique puzzle rooms you go through to find access to the final boss. The actual fights in this area aren't great, and after you get back to Seaside and have to fight Urinovich? I've never known how to say that. I super check out because that fight is frustrating. But diving underwater and hanging out with shark people is enough to elevate this world above other parts of this game. Alright, everyone mad about Mario RPG can come back now, because this whole game is fantastic and not talked about enough. So, I need you all to listen up. I chose this world mostly for the visual of the level map, as there's a strange satisfaction to beating a level and then walking through different parts of a giant robotic Mario mech. The levels themselves are fantastic too, don't get me wrong, with wind-up toy enemies and a really unique visual style, but once you're inside the levels, it's easy to forget that you're like, hanging out inside Mario, since it's just cool toy-themed levels, you know? But what it lacks in Mario theming, it makes up for with its knockoff Lego brick style and overabundance of bouncy balls that would make Bounce Man proud.
Bounce time!
Also, the boss of this world is the Three Little Pigs. And while it's not a terribly hard boss battle, it adds to that sense of whimsy that this whole game nails so well. Frankly, any of the worlds could have made this list. They're all unique looking and brilliantly designed. This game doesn't get enough love. But I went with this one solely for the weirdness of setting a Mario world inside of Mario. Someone watched one too many episodes of the Magic School Bus to come up with that one.
Get a shot of those vocal cords, class!
The runner-up here is just as good though, so let's move on. Remember when I said there were better examples of Mario games playing around with size? Well, even the act of entering this world is clever, as there's a clear but simple visual on the main map that shrinks you down on the way in. The world you enter, then, is a normal-sized house that you now have to invade and do some pest control in, since you're the size of an ant, basically. This world is full of levels that are all themed around different areas of the house, starting outside in kind of an ant farm, and going in through a garden-type area, and then the main floor and into the attic storage. Each level is only loosely themed around an actual house, but it was also the Game Boy, so the fact that everything in this world is as stylized as it is was still a really big deal for this game. Plus, I'm just a sucker for levels that play with scale and use everyday objects in clever ways. No Mario game plays with size better than this iconic world from Mario 3. I'll admit, I wish this world took the mechanics a little further, as even though Mario is noticeably smaller than his surroundings, he still can break the large blocks just as effortlessly as the smaller blocks, and casually walk across even the largest of pipes that should realistically be large holes that would swallow him up if you looked at the level from a 3D perspective. But for an NES game I played when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, the sheer creativity of this world blew my mind. And to this day, I remember it fondly in a game that has otherwise fairly traditional themes to its worlds. What Mario game now doesn't have desert, water, and lava worlds? But these size-changing worlds are few and far between, so pretty much every inclusion is close to my heart for the way it mixes up the usual formulas. But that's not to say the usual formulas can't still be good. Sky worlds are also extremely common in Mario games, but this is one of the better executions of that, so it gets a pass in my book. The reason it stands out is that it's split in two, with the mid-world castle giving you access to jump between the two halves of this world. Don't get me wrong, there's some pretty great levels in this world too. A personal favorite is the level in the clouds with super fast spinny platforms that fling you around if you time your jumps wrong, because it's led to many a frustrated giggle fit every time I play this game as I try to speed run the level, but eventually just give up and just pewing over all the annoyances. But hey, I remember it. There's also a clever level that almost entirely relies on riding the backs of enemies to make it through, and I'm a sucker for non-traditional level designs like that, even if it moves a little slower. Ultimately, this world has some clever twists on the now common trope of sky worlds, and since it was one of the first, I don't hold the theme against it. Aw yeah, another chance to talk about Mario Galaxy Worlds, let's do this. On the topic of Mario tropes, nearly every mainline game also has an ice world, but this one flips that idea on its head by having you seamlessly switch between Fire Flower and Ice Flower power-ups throughout various parts of the galaxy as you skate around on ice platforms, melting obstacles, and then create your own paths through lava sections to keep your momentum through the levels. Even in the more traditional sections of the galaxy that are just lava, or just ice and snow, the new Ice Flower power-up makes for some really fun gameplay moments, skating around in a hurry, compared to how unfun the Cappy transformation was in Mario Odyssey that lets you explore in lava, and it really does highlight the merits of this world. But there's still one more runner-up to discuss, so let's wrap this up. Wrap. You'll get it in a second. I guess I'm just a sucker for toy-themed worlds too, because the whimsy of this one really got to me. I almost switched the order of these two galaxies, but since Freeze Flame is one of my most memorable gaming experiences of all time, not just in a Mario game, I couldn't justify putting this galaxy above it. But it's still fantastic. The spring power-up just isn't nearly as fun or intuitive as the Ice Flower, and the spring power-up is used a lot in this world. It has some great visuals though, and top-notch platforming around a bunch of toy block landscapes, fighting wind-up Koopa toys. This galaxy also includes a fun puzzle involving jumping around on an 8-bit Mario structure, as well as a mecha boss fight that's probably the closest a Mario game will ever get to a Shadow of the Colossus crossover, as you hit weak points while scaling the giant toy. It's all great stuff, really. I just hate the spring power-up, so it gets some points docked for the heavy reliance on that. So, that's it. My list of the best Mario worlds. The Mario series is truly amazing, and this was a hard list to make, but I hope we at least shared in some nostalgia, even if you don't agree with my picks. But as always, let me know what worlds you would have included. Let's keep the dialogue going in the comments in honor of this holiday. Man, it's gonna be really awkward if I don't get this out on March 10th. Which makes for some really fun platforming sections and creates super embarrassing. And creates brilliant objectives needed to it. Really?